Alright, for this video I want to talk about the Form 1099 NEC, and more specifically, what do you do when you receive this? How do you report it on your tax return? Because it's not always such a clear answer. So we do have a sample 1099 NEC in front of us, and I do have a sample tax return for the taxpayer that we're going to be working with here, John Q, taxpayer. And then in addition to those two items, I do have one slide here covering some background on the form and some of the other things that we need to be considering before we just go ahead and plug this into the software and report it on our tax return. So who needs to be filing this 1099 NEC? Firstly, a business that is making the payments to someone, they're responsible for filing the 1099 NEC. So if you are the person doing the work and you're receiving the income, you're not going to be filing the 1099 NEC. You're going to be receiving it from a business. And so businesses need to file this if they pay a person $600 or more during the year, and those services were performed by someone who is not an employee of that organization, or they're for payments made to an attorney. So a person that is not an employee, if they were an employee, then they would be getting a W-2, right? So these are for services or goods performed by someone who is treated as what we would consider an independent contractor. All right. Now, if you receive this 1099 NEC as an individual, how you report it depends upon the character of the income, the relationship you have between the payor, right, and yourself as the individual, and then your activities, right? So what are you doing to generate or earn this income? So there's really three options, and I have each of the three options underlined here and as the bullet points. So the first one is, are you engaged in a trade or business and self-employed in that capacity? The second one is, are those earnings considered other income not from a trade or business? Or is this income from a hobby activity? So are you selling something or receiving income, and this is from an activity that is not a for-profit activity, so it's a hobby activity. So if we focus on what is a trade or business is loosely defined as holding oneself out to others, as actively engaging in the selling of goods or services, right? So it's an activity where you have a for-profit motive, and you're doing this activity on a regular, frequent, and continuous basis. So it's not just a one-off occurrence. In contrast, when we look at the second option, right, are these earnings just other income, not from a trade or business? This would be something where you receive money and the activity is irregular, infrequent, or not continuous. So it's the polar opposite of what we see with a trade or business activity. And there is not a lot of well-defined rules, but there are some examples floating out there. So if we look at Revenue Ruling 58-112, in that scenario, an officer of a company was separately paid to negotiate the sale of the company. So it was separate and apart from his W-2 salary, right, as an officer. Now, that separate payment, because it was a one-off payment, it was irregular, that officer was deemed to not be engaged in a trade or business. So those earnings that he received were not self-employed income. Also, in the second example, we have a man here who is participating in a drug study, all right, and he received a lump sum payment for his participation in that study. In that scenario, again, it wasn't continuous, it wasn't frequent, it wasn't regular, and so because it was a one-off payment, it was still subject to income taxes, but it was not income received in connection with a trade or business. And this is really important when we get into the self-employment considerations. And then the last one there is hobby income, right? So if you are engaged in activity, but it's just recreational, right? You're doing it for fun or for sport. So you're not really trying to run a business here. There's no for-profit motive. If you sell something and you receive a payment from somebody, that income is going to be considered hobby income. So it's not other income. It's not considered income in connection with a trade or business as a self-employed person. So very, very important that we be very precise about what it is that we're receiving here. So how do all these amounts get reported depending on the character? And so I want to go through them all first, and then we'll go to the return, and we'll have a look as to where those get reported. So if we have other income, right? So it's that middle one here. That would be reported on Schedule 1, Part 1, Line 8Z. Now, these amounts, if it's reported there, it's going to be subject to income tax, but it's not going to be subject to self-employment taxes. Now, in addition, you can't claim any deductions against that income, right? So you just report the income on Schedule 1, Part 1, Line 8Z, and then it's subject to your regular federal income tax, but not self-employment tax. So if we jump to John's return, let me scroll down to Schedule 1 so you can see where that is. So we have Schedule 1, Part 1. It would be in here, Line 8Z. So line 8 is other income. There's a variety of options here, but 8Z is other income, and so you would report that other income there. Now, the second one here, hobby income, this is also reported on Schedule 1. So it's Schedule 1, Part 1, Line 8J. Now, these earnings are also subject to income tax, but not subject to self-employment taxes, right? So similar to the scenario we have above with the other income. Also, you're not able to claim deductions against hobby income. And this was a new change, right? So prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, if you had hobby expenses, you could claim hobby expenses as another itemized deduction up to your hobby income. But now that the miscellaneous 2% itemized deductions have been repealed, you really can't claim any expenses. So your hobby income is simply the gross amount of money that you received. And again, that's reported up here, Schedule 1, Part 1, Line 8, and then Line J, right? So Line J, activity not engaged in for-profit income, okay? And then the last one here, this is what we're going to be working with in our scenario, right? So if we have self-employment earnings, right? These earnings are reported on Schedule C, Line 1, and then the net earnings, after considering the deductions, are subject to income taxes and self-employment taxes. And the self-employment taxes are reported on a Schedule SE. Now, the sole proprietor here is also able to claim business-related deductions, and this helps reduce their net self-employed earnings. So, obviously, a huge difference here depending on how you characterize this, right? So is your income self-employment income, or is it simply other income? Because your ability to be able to claim deductions is huge. And as well, whether you can exclude this from self-employment tax or it must be included in your self-employment tax is also a big consideration. So if we look at our fact pattern here, we have John Q. Taxpayer. He is employed full-time as an accountant at a local bank. But as a way to make some extra money, he offers his services as a bookkeeper to other local businesses. And so he has one contract where a company pays him $1,000 per month to reconcile their bank accounts and prepare accounting records. And so his relationship with that company is as an independent contractor, right? So he's not an employee. Now the company prepares a 1099 NEC, which shows $12,000 of earnings in box 1. So John's trying to figure out, how do I report these earnings? Well, if this is his only customer, that's fine, but we have to look at, what is he doing, right? Are his activities regular, frequent, continuous? And arguably they are, right? This is not a one-off kind of project, right? He's being hired to work month to month for the entire year to help reconcile these companies' bank accounts, credit cards, and accounting records. So it's certainly not a hobby, and it's arguably not other income too, because it's not these one-off kind of sporadic type projects or payments, right? This is clearly a monthly contract he has with a company to do this work, so it should be self-employed earnings. Now, if we assume that that's his only customer, which again is fine, he could still be considered engaged in a trade or business with only one customer. So he would report it on Schedule C. So we have John's Schedule C here. We have his bookkeeping services as the principal business or profession. And then we have down here in Part 1, there's the $12,000, right? So his 1099 NEC shows $12,000 as non-employee compensation. He reports that amount here on line 1, and then on lines 8 through 27A, he can claim business deductions that he has in connection with this activity. So you notice he doesn't have much here, right? He's got some insurance, some, let's say professional liability insurance, some advertising costs, supplies expense. So nothing too substantial, but Nevertheless, it still helps, right? $1,000 of expenses will go a long way when you're self-employed. So his net earnings from self-employment are $11,000. So he needs to report that on the Schedule SE to compute the amount of self-employment tax that he's going to owe. And then that is also reported up on Schedule 1, line 3, business income or loss coming through from Schedule C. All right. So that covers it for this video. I hope that was helpful. Just a quick overview as to, when you get the 1099 NEC or if it's a 1099 miscellaneous, don't always kind of jump to conclusions as to what the character of the income is. You need to really do this analysis to make sure that what was reported to you is accurately reflected on your return in the correct manner that it should be. All right, so that covers it. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next video. Thank you.